Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar on this critically important topic of pedestrian safety and keeping people walking and rolling on our roadways safe. I'm Adam Snider. I'm GHSA's Director of Communications. GHSA, the Governor's Highway Safety Association, is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and we're the association representing state and territorial highway safety offices. Those offices in all of the states and territories plan and implement behavioral traffic safety programs at the state level. While their primary focus is on the behavioral side, they work with a wide range of partners to address all aspects of roadway safety, with the goal of getting to a future where no one dies in a traffic crash. We have a packed agenda for you today, so let's dive right in. In a few moments, I'll give a brief overview of some of the data findings in GHSA's new report on pedestrian traffic fatalities by state. We'll then hear from two SHSO leaders who will share what their offices are doing, working with partners and others to make it safer for people walking. And then we'll also have a panel discussion. We welcome your questions. We'll be joined by the two SHSO leaders, myself and several others. So please, we want to hear from you. Ask your questions. There's a Q&A box on your screen. Drop those questions in. We're doing something a little unique on this webinar. We've recorded several of these presentations today. So you don't need to wait till someone's done speaking to ask your question. You can drop your questions in at any time, and some folks will weigh in with some answers along the way. And if not, we'll try to address it during the Q&A portion at the end. Without further ado, a humongous thank you to Qualcomm, the sponsor of today's webinar. We're extremely pleased to be joined today by Jim Misener. He's the Senior Director of Product Management and Global Vehicle to Everything Ecosystem Lead for Qualcomm. In that role, he executes Qualcomm's cellular vehicle to everything deployment strategy across the globe, and he previously led the company's automotive standards team. He's a pioneer and has extensive experience in vehicle highway automation and vehicle safety communication. Without further ado, Jim, I'd love to hear from you.
I'd like to start by thanking GHSA for the leadership in safety advocacy and VRU safety in particular. It's a privilege to be invited to take part of this webinar. Now, roads are dangerous. Take intersections where drivers, riders, pedestrians converge. They're one of the most dangerous places in the road. According to FHWA, roughly a quarter of traffic fatalities and half of all traffic injuries in the U.S. occur at intersections. But there's more danger than just at the intersection. Vulnerable road users, VRUs, also encounter dangerous situations mid-block. According to a recent NCHRP study, about 17% of pedestrian fatalities at mid-block, and 80% of those are unmarked crossings. What can we do about this? We all understand that the crash fatality problem is unacceptable. Qualcomm, the technology innovators working with stakeholders across the transportation industry to deploy wireless technology solutions that can help make our roads safe for all users. One is what we call cellular V2X, or vehicle to everything. So this will allow vehicles to communicate to everything, right? But directly with each other, the roadside infrastructure, and now increasingly in our concepts and deployments to vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians and cyclists. We want to actively encourage safe behavior among all road users with this type of information. So as I alluded to earlier, but it's worth belaboring, CV2X is not necessarily connected to the network, although there are some instances where it could be, depending on the use case. But it supports real-time information exchange to inform safety applications, even in highly congested environments such as urban intersections. An example would be CV2X integrated into luminaires along with the detector. So there's all of a sudden a better version of a smart light. So with this smart light, mid-block or even intersection crossing pedestrians are detected, and the CV2X signal then is sent to the oncoming equipped car at some range to alert the driver in a salient and time-critical manner. But this luminaire, solid state, can change color or even flash to alert nearby cars who don't even have CV2X, and to give some assurance to the vulnerable road user that things in a good way are happening to try to protect him or her. There are lots of other applications of CVTOX. It doesn't have to be constrained to Luminera. For example, a rectangular rapid flashing beacon could be used. There could be direct communication with the car from the intersection. It goes on and on. The idea is to address safety. An application that we all know about is work zone safety. CV2X would be a nice supplement to that. In fact, entities such as US DOT, state DOTs, and a large number of local agencies are working very hard to try to make these applications, this technology adder, to work in ways that would start to protect the users that we all love and care for. So we at Qualcomm are excited to be working with the city of Chattanooga on a Luminera approach that I discussed a little bit earlier, which tries to put CV2X technology into mid-block crossings at a busy and dangerous arterial. So this deployment showcases both the combination of local and federal investment. And U.S. Department of Transportation is stepping up in significant ways to try to meet these safety needs with their CV2X deployment and other types of discretionary grants. So you can learn more about these on USDOT's website. We can have a dialogue about them. But it's very important as GHSA that you are basically a beacon to show these types of applications could exist in addition to very good civil engineering, a very good transportation policy that aims towards safety. So we look forward to working with you to bring this potentially life-saving technology to intersections and roadways across the U.S. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Jim will be joining us later for our panel discussion. So please type those questions in the Q&A box. We'd love to hear from you. Now it's time to dive into GHSA's new report on pedestrian traffic fatalities and what the data says. So GHSA has been collecting this data for more than a decade. We have been analyzing pedestrian traffic fatalities by state, collecting data from SHSOs across the country. This offers a first look at the national and state-by-state changes that can indicate positive or negative changes. Our numbers from the SHSOs differ somewhat from the numbers in NHTSA's Fatality Analysis Reporting System database due to several differences in the ways that deaths are counted between the two databases. But there's a tremendous value in this early look at state data and seeing where trends are going. The past few years, GHSA has issued 2 reports, a preliminary one that looks at January through June data, and then later in the year, a full year report for January through December. This follow-up report also includes a comprehensive analysis of FARS data that provides additional insights and outlines a number of countermeasures that states are using to keep people on foot safe. I'd also note that these reports generate a lot of media coverage. Our most recent report using 2023 data came out towards the end of June and has been covered by a wide range of publications all across the country at the national, state, and local level. This media coverage is tremendously helpful to raise awareness of this pedestrian safety crisis and really put this issue on more people's radars. Before we get into the data, I want to take a brief moment just to note that we're going to be talking about a lot of numbers, but these numbers are people. These are our mothers, our brothers, our sisters, our family members, our coworkers, our congregants at church, our neighbors. These are our community members that are dying suddenly and violently and far too soon. It is unacceptable. If you haven't been directly impacted by this crisis, odds are you know someone who has been. But that's why we do what we do, to reach a future where no one has to die in a traffic crash. So what did our data find? Looking at 2023 data from states across the country, we found that drivers struck and killed 7,318 people walking in 2023. The good news is that's down a little bit from the year before, down about 5% from 2022. The bad news is that's still 14.1% above 2019, the last pre-pandemic year. So the decline is certainly good news, but we've seen very sharp increases the past few years. So we have a long way to go and much more progress to make. Certainly worth celebrating this progress so far, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that more pedestrians died last year on our roads than the last year before COVID. This cannot be one of the new normals of post-COVID life. Looking at the state level, changes in pedestrian fatalities really varied by state. We saw across the country 29 states experience fewer decreases. It was great to see it finally a year where the majority of states saw fewer pedestrian fatalities. 21 states and the District of Columbia did see an increase. In terms of the decrease, about more than half of that decrease, 58% of the overall decrease in pedestrian fatalities was concentrated in 2 states, Arizona and California. In addition to looking at the state data, our report also analyzed NHTSA's FARS data over the past decade. This really provides a lot of insights on long-term trends about when, where, and why drivers strike and kill people walking, and really lets us dive deeper into particular causal factors, such as infrastructure, alcohol impairment, and things like that. One stat in particular, there's a lot that stand out, but if I had to pick one that really jumps out from this look at the FARS data, is the disproportionate rise in pedestrian fatalities over the past decade. They are rising far faster than all other traffic fatalities. Since 2010, we've seen a 77% rise in pedestrian deaths compared to just 22% for all other traffic deaths. And shockingly, that gap is getting worse in recent years. Looking at the past 2 years of complete data, there were more pedestrian deaths and fewer deaths from all other crashes. So this gap is really getting worse, and we really need to, it really illustrates the need to focus on pedestrian safety in everything we do. Now let's look at a few of the important causal factors. One of those is daytime or nighttime. The vast majority of pedestrian deaths occur at night, and the share of nighttime deaths has risen even more in recent years. This chart on the screen here, I know there's a lot of numbers, but the blue line is pedestrian deaths at night, and the orange line is during the day. And you'll see over the past decade, those ones at night have really significantly increased. They've nearly doubled from about 3,000 in 2010 to almost 6,000 in 2022. That's a 92% increase compared to just 28% for daytime fatalities. Another interesting fact about this is more than half of the fatalities at night occurred where there was artificial lighting, such as a street light, which really speak to the importance of not just installing lighting in more communities across the country, but then maintaining that lighting so its quality doesn't degrade and drivers can continue to see pedestrians. Another important factor is the presence of sidewalks. In 2022, 2/3 of pedestrian deaths were in a place where no sidewalk was noted on the crash report. That's a significant increase from 60% just a few years before. Sidewalks it's such a basic thing, but they are such an important tool to help protect people walking by providing a physical separation between motor vehicles and the vulnerable road users. Unfortunately, in a lot of parts of the country, they're missing or in poor condition, which again speaks to the need to fund these infrastructure projects that can help keep people safe. The sizes and weights of our vehicles are getting larger and heavier. It's an incredibly important factor as well. Looking at the past decade, our report found that the number of pedestrian deaths involving passenger cars and light trucks, which I'll just pause for a moment to note that light trucks, that's a category that includes SUVs, pickups, and vans. But light trucks and passenger car deaths for pedestrians tracked largely similar most years up until about 2019, as you can see on the chart on screen. Beginning in 2020, however, light trucks began to account for a much larger share of pedestrian fatalities as they continue to be a large proportion of US new vehicle sales and leases. So it's this gap that has emerged the past few years. When you also look at some of the sales data showing the continued popularity of trucks in this country and fewer passenger cars being sold or leased, that we expect this gap to really grow in coming years. Pedestrian deaths involving light trucks has risen 77% over the past decade, compared to just 25% for deaths from passenger cars. Although race and ethnicity data for 2022 pedestrian deaths was not available in FARS due to delays in processing death certificates, we did want to look at the most recent years of complete data in FARS. And doing so, you can see a lot of the breakdown on our screen, but I would just point to a couple notable numbers, which was deaths involving non-Hispanic white pedestrians fell from 43 to 40% in just 2 years' time, while they rose from 19% to 21% for non-Hispanic Black pedestrians. This finding is honestly, frustratingly not surprising. It's in line with multiple other studies that have documented repeatedly that people of color are overrepresented in pedestrian fatalities. This speaks to the need to place equity and reducing these racial disparities central to everything that state highway safety offices, that GHSA, that everyone in government and in the traffic safety community does. We have to put equity center in order to reduce these racial disparities and narrow this gap. So these are just a few of the numbers in the report. I certainly encourage you to take a look for much more data, and we'll be talking about a few more things coming up soon. But why? I want to take a moment to sort of think about why these deaths have risen in recent years. You know, it is good to see this decline recently, but what's fueled this surge over the past decade, and especially during COVID? Answer is complicated, a number of factors. One big one is some reductions in traffic enforcement. Nationwide, we're seeing traffic enforcement fall across the country. That enables dangerous driving, speeding, drunk driving, impaired driving, distracted driving. It allows those to flourish and run amok. Those are deadly behaviors behind the wheel that kill people on foot every single day. Just a few days ago, the Kansas City Star highlighted some of the enforcement reductions in the Kansas City area, as they've also seen a rise in traffic deaths. Unfortunately, that story is not unique to Kansas City or Missouri or the Midwest. It is happening everywhere in our country. Other factors contributing to this rise in pedestrian deaths. Our roads are frequently designed to prioritize fast-moving vehicle traffic over slower speeds that are safer for people on foot and on bicycles. As I mentioned with sidewalks and lighting, a lot of parts of the country have inadequate or missing infrastructure, crosswalks, sidewalks, lighting. Those are countermeasures that help keep people safe. It's especially impactful in communities of color. We know that poor and inadequate infrastructure is a major issue in communities of color. So again, speaks to the importance of addressing this holistically and equitably. As I mentioned earlier, our vehicles are getting larger and heavier, and our electric vehicles accelerate incredibly quickly. All of those are much more dangerous for people on foot. So there's a lot of dangers and concerns out there. What can we do about it? That's what we're really here to talk about and focus on. How do we address all of these different factors we talked about and some of the ones we didn't talk about? Long answer short, we need a comprehensive safe system approach. This is a multi-layered safety net that minimizes the chances of a crash occurring. And if a crash does occur, it mitigates any potential impacts. This includes, safe system approach includes equitable enforcement of traffic safety laws, these dangerous driving behaviors, speeding and impaired driving, for example, that kill people on foot. It includes more and better designed infrastructure that separates people on foot from vehicle traffic. It involves community outreach and engagement that informs drivers of their role in keeping pedestrians safe and gives communities, especially those underrepresented communities, a voice in the traffic safety and pedestrian safety planning process. We need more and better vehicle technology, pedestrian automatic emergency braking, intelligent speed assist, things like that, utilizing all the great technology features. We heard a little from Jim earlier about cellular V2X, but we need to utilize all of these technologies to help keep people safe. And improve post-crash care, providing quick, high-quality medical attention to people who have been in a crash will increase their chances of survival. So those are just a few of the things we need to do. The bottom line is the safe system, it's not a multiple choice quiz. We don't select A, B, or C. We don't pick which countermeasures we like or don't like. We need to use all of them because we have a crisis, and this demands that we do everything that works to help keep people safe. So thank you. Thank you for staying with me while I highlighted a couple of the key data points in our report. You can see some links on the screen to access the report, the news release. A few infographics are available for download as well. There's also some more information on GHSA's social media accounts on LinkedIn and X. I encourage you to follow us there, to follow along on the conversation. Thank you for staying tuned for that. I'd like to turn now to some SHSOs and hear some examples from the states about what we are doing, what they are doing to help keep pedestrians safe. Up first, Shelly Baldwin. She's the director of the Washington Traffic Safety Commission and the first woman to serve in this position. She's worked in traffic safety in various roles for more than 25 years and has a deep commitment to the agency's Target Zero mission of eliminating traffic deaths and serious injuries. And as I mentioned before, we've recorded some of these presentations, so we'll queue up Shelly's video, but please pop into that Q&A box and ask any questions. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Adam. I'm so happy to be here today as we're discussing the Governor's Highway Safety Association pedestrian report. It's so important right now. I know in Washington, we're experiencing some of the highest numbers of pedestrian fatalities on record. So we're doing everything we can to reverse that trend. The Washington safe system approach looks a little bit different, this graphic, than what you might be used to, because Washington, everything's green, because it's a beautiful land and country, and because we added safer land use to our elements. You can see it's so important for us to consider the safe system approach, especially when we're looking at pedestrians. All of those elements really come into play. When you look at safer people, you want drivers who are focused and looking out for all of the different people who use our roadways. And we want them to be going the speed limit. That's very important because the human body can only take so much force. If we look at safer roads, we know that we need to have the separation between drivers who are using our roads and the other people who are using our roads, those people outside the vehicle. That means having the right sidewalk and bike lane and wheelchair access. All of that is necessary for us to really build a system that is safe for pedestrians. Safer speeds are really critical because of the human factors involved. The faster you're going, the bigger the force, the harder the crash, and people don't have any protection around them. So with safer speeds, we really want to look at whether or not we've set an appropriate speed limit in those areas where people are. So in Washington, when we did our vulnerable road user assessment, what we really found was these areas of legacy roads, right? So they were state routes, but now they run basically through cities. They don't just connect cities anymore. So we have, 4 or 5 lanes, wide crossing areas, long stretches between crosswalks, and none of that has been changed. So now we have to look, yeah, it was set up for something that was safe for 40 miles an hour, decades ago, but the road looks a lot different now. That's kind of what brings us into safer land use as well as looking at speed. So that's why we've added safer land use, because when you build a road that has apartments on one side and shopping on the other side, and it's a mile between crosswalks, people are going to cross in the middle. So really looking at how we can protect pedestrians with safer land use, safer vehicles. I know we're having a discussion right now about having requirements that vehicles also can stop and brake for pedestrians. When we think about what vehicles have done and how protected they've made the people inside the vehicle, we have to understand that that same protection hasn't so far been afforded to pedestrians and bicyclists and the people outside the vehicle. Post-crash care, you definitely need to have the right people get to the crash when it happens as quickly as possible and get them to the right care system. And there's a lot of steps in there that we can support through the safe system approach. So when we bring all of that together, we can really see how the safe system approach and pedestrians go hand in hand. So I also wanted to talk today about speed safety cameras. In Washington, we've been doing a lot of work around expanding how speed safety cameras can be used. Prior, they were allowed in school speed zones, but we've extended it through the last 3 years to the whole school walk route, to public park speed zones, to hospital zones, and just recently we've added roadway cameras for work zones, even on freeways. So that's a pretty exciting and complicated thing to have done, but we're excited to protect those workers, especially on freeways where speeds are so high. And then this last year, we also made it clear that a city could decide to put a camera on one of those stroads, so those state highways that function as city streets, hoping that we can at least keep cars to the speed limit, and then hopefully also allowing cities to reduce that speed when it's necessary. We did some work legislatively around allowing cities and counties to lower speed limits without having to do expensive studies or justify it left and right. They can just, look and say, this is a place where we need slower speeds because there's lots of people here now. As we pass these laws, the Traffic Safety Commission has been publishing a guide, the Speed Safety Camera and Readiness Guide that you can see on the screen there. And it really is designed for public policy makers. And it allows them to understand how to do a speed camera program with the best effectiveness. And that involves more than just picking the right product and putting it up. This guide really walks them through equity considerations, how to make sure you're putting cameras in the right locations to get the best results, but you're not overburdening an area that is already overburdened with more tickets than other areas. Understanding that you may need these in the short term, but the long-term goal should be to improve the area where the camera is so that it's not as necessary. People go the right speed and pedestrians will be protected because you've done the other work that needs to be done. This guide, the Washington law actually requires that revenue from speed cameras go back to public safety, really emphasizing infrastructure as the right place to gather that money and then improve the area where you need a speed camera to start with. The guide also talks about how to make sure that you're involving the public in the decisions, and letting the public know why is really important and how the funding is spent, because I think early speed cameras ended up with a lot of bad rap for being money grabs, and that's not what they are now. In Washington, the rules have really taken that out. So we're happy to have a guide that our partners can share with cities and counties to encourage them to take a really important step on a system that we know is really increasing safety and slowing those speeds down, especially where pedestrians are present. So I will be here to talk to you, answer questions after the presentations, but I look forward to hearing them. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelly, for that very, very interesting presentation and some wonderful information. And that we've included a link to the safety camera readiness guide in the chat box for folks to download that as well. Moving from one side of the country to the other, one Washington to the other. Up next, we have Rick Birt. He's the director of the Washington, D.C. Highway Safety Office. So we've moved from the West Coast to the East Coast. Rick has more than a decade of highway safety experience in several roles, including as president and CEO of Students Against Destructive Decisions. When he's not innovating and pioneering at the D.C. Highway Safety Office, and Rick, you'll pardon me for taking the liberty of sharing this, but it's in your official bio. So you can find him behind the information desk at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, helping visitors, where he volunteers his time, helping visitors navigate the airport. I think that's a lovely, amazing thing that Rick does. It's a beautiful airport, I must say, but it's just one of the many wonderful things about Rick that I absolutely love and just wanted to share with folks on today's webinar. So without further ado, Rick, we will hear your presentation and then you will be joining us live for the Q&A afterwards.
Thank you, GHSA team. Truly a pleasure to be with you. I'm Rick Birt. I'm the director of the Highway Safety Office here in the District of Columbia. Really excited to talk a little bit about some of the innovative and forward-thinking things that we're trying to do here in the District of Columbia to protect some of our most vulnerable movers, our pedestrians and our vulnerable roadway users, as they travel to and through the District of Columbia. Now, for many of you, when you think of Washington, D.C., I'm sure a myriad of things come to mind. Certainly our iconic landmarks, our historic sites, our wonderful nightlife and culture. But we're also a place where we attract a large variety of different folks who are coming in for different purposes. We're one of the largest stages for First Amendment presentations and demonstrations. We're also a place of history and culture where folks come to be part of our diplomatic corps and to experience our country for a lot of different ways. So we're really in a unique environment. So your perceptions, your first thoughts are correct of Washington, D.C., but it's also this, a vibrant cityscape. Right now, as I look out my window, I can literally see a unicycle, a scooter, a moped, a motor-driven cycle, a bus, a pedestrian, a very complex ecosystem that's oftentimes very hard for folks to navigate. And so unfortunately, the tragedies are often tied to those who are the most vulnerable. So the cityscape really creates an interesting dynamic, but we're also more than just a city. We're also neighborhoods. We have vibrant neighborhoods of folks who have been here for decades, third and fourth and fifth generations who have called the district home. And to me, this subject of pedestrian safety is very personal because these are two of my favorite pedestrians. My wife, Chelsea, and our dog, Phoenix. The three of us are daily pedestrians. And so the things we're talking about here are very personal to me because they're keeping my family, my friends, my colleagues, my neighbors safe. And so I'm reminded of the fact that as Jerry Spinelli said, at home is everything you can walk to. And we're very proud of everything you can walk to in the District of Columbia, but that just means because we are so walkable, our traveling public faces really unique challenges. And so we use this safe system approach to really think about how each agency in the district, each of our partners, each of our grantees have a critical role to play. So we're not just using the traditional safe system approach, we've enhanced that to break this down to responsible parties. And I want to talk just for a few moments about some of the great work that these agencies are doing to keep our pedestrians safe. First of all, using our high injury network and our sidewalk plan, we've looked at 5% of our roadways that have accounted for 50% of our pedestrian fatalities. If you could zoom in on that map or you visit our website, you could actually see that the roads in red are what we call our first tier, our tier 1 high injury segments. Those are areas where we're doing historic projects right now and literally looking at infrastructure, how we can redo our bus priority projects. And you may say, Rick, why are you talking about a bus priority project? we've worked really hard at our Department of Transportation and are thankful to our partners at DDOT for helping us think through every time they touch a road, how we can enhance it for pedestrian safety. So even though we're redoing our bus lanes and we're doing a bus priority project, well, we know that every time someone rides a bus, as soon as they step off, guess what? They're now a pedestrian. So really weaving pedestrian safety into our culture, into everything that we do through an engineering lens is so important. And that informs our sidewalk plan. We have one of the highest percentages of walkability in the country. We're one of the most walkable cities in the US. We have 84% of our city that is feasible and accessible via sidewalk. But if you do the math, that's still 16%. We consider that a serious charge, particularly because our communities that have been historically left behind are Black, Indigenous people of color. Our Latinx communities are oftentimes those that have been historically forgotten and not designed with those infrastructures. So again, we're working really hard to use our sidewalk plan as an opportunity to infuse equity, not just in what we say, but literally what we build. But we know that once we've made those improvements, we need to also be mindful to make sure that we're educating people on what those enhancements means for their daily commute and for their daily lives. Use of hawk signals and pedestrian centered intervals and how we time things are really important. We have, again, one of the highest percentages of pedestrian leading intervals in the country. At over 86% of our intersections, we give our pedestrians that jump start so that folks can really be aware of what they're doing, where they're visible to our drivers. And again, we've seen great success. But whenever you visit one of these hawk signals or you look at some of our leading pedestrian intervals, we also do education right on the sidewalk. There are stamps, there are signage right on the sidewalk to explain to people what they're looking at, to understand the benefit. And that's also part of our public education, not just to our traveling public, but our neighbors who are seeing these features each and every day. We're also focusing on safe routes to school. We know that our kiddos are some of our most vulnerable roadway users. Every sidewalk, every bike lane, and every form of transportation around a school zone in the district is currently being reevaluated. We're doing a historic investment in this. I don't have time to go into that too much today, but I encourage you to check out our Safe Routes to School website, where you can view an individualized plan for each and every building, each and every community within the District of Columbia, and what we're doing there. But we also think it's not just about infrastructure, it's not just about community engagement, it's also about education and enforcement, tying these two E's together, and again, separating them out of their silo to make it part of a system approach, a safe system approach. The Metropolitan Police Department has been doing what we call our pedestrian decoy program. We take out of clothes, or plain clothes, I should say, law enforcement officers and put them in an unregulated crosswalk like what you see here. This is actually one of our law enforcement officers. She's taking control of an unlit intersection, and we see if the driver yields the way they're supposed to once the pedestrian has control of the intersection. If they don't, upstream a little ways, there's a law enforcement officer who pulls that car over, issues a citation, and more importantly, delivers a piece of education so that drivers understand the importance of yielding to pedestrians. They understand what the law is. And again, because we have such a transient population with folks coming and going, over 2 million people a day commuting into our city of only about 750,000 residents, it's really important that those who are new to the district understand the rules of our road and they understand the social construct for our pedestrians. But again, we also understand that, again, looking at education and enforcement means looking at our data. We saw last year that about 10% of our fatalities were tied to individuals who were unhoused. And so with funding from Ford Philanthropy and GHSA, we've been able to introduce a program engaging our unhoused population by really doing three core things. One, training law enforcement on how to engage the unhoused population and include mobility safety in the work that they're doing. Number two, create a space for those who are engaging the unhoused population, our social workers and our partners, to help us be able to do training for those audiences also on mobility safety. Our key partner on this is H3, which is one of our largest shelters in the district. They house over 200 individuals every night. And so we're working with them and using their technical assistance to be able to train this audience on how to include mobility safety. And then three, creating resources and materials that can be used by this audience to, again, increase their education, increase their visibility, and make them an active part of our active transportation network. So we're very proud of the work that we're doing here in the District of Columbia. We have a long way to go, unfortunately, but pedestrian safety, again, it's a really important issue for us as a city, us as a district, and me as a professional. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. appreciate this opportunity and look forward to answering your questions and learning with and from all of you.
Great. Thank you, Rick. I'd like to invite all of our panelists now to join us live for our panel discussion and Q&A. Rick Birt, Shelly Baldwin, Jim Misener. We're also joined by Elizabeth Petraglia. She's a statistician with Westat, a data analytics firm, and she did the data analysis for GHSA's report. She's here to answer any in-depth data analysis or methodology questions. I'd just like to note that GHSA has worked with her and her team at Westat the past few years on these pedestrian safety reports, and they've been a wonderful partner in helping publicize the dangers pedestrians face and how we can make things safer for people walking. So thank you again to everyone for joining for the panel discussion, for your insightful presentations. Attendees, please pop those questions into the Q&A box. I see a number already. I see folks have been hard at work answering the questions. I love to see that engagement. Please do keep the questions coming. I do see one about how the public responded. Not exactly sure what they're referring to there, but if you could clear that up, we'd love to get an answer for you. So I'd start, Jim, one for you. Cellular V2X, CV2X. It sounds amazing, having warnings for drivers of a pedestrian up ahead. It sounds honestly a little sci-fi-ish to me. How long is something like this going to take to get implemented, and how can SHSOs and others in the traffic safety community work with Qualcomm and others to speed up this implementation?
Well, thanks for the question. Happy to, well, there is a significant momentum among those who are carrying the banner of GHSA. Thank you for that. But it all begins with state and local implementations. So this is a perfect group to talk about how it's going to be done. The US DOT is leading the charge, and they will likely come up with a deployment plan, which is probably a decade deployment, how you do this from the infrastructure. The infrastructure starts, our OEMs are anxious to deploy, but they're not ready to, partly because the FCC has not given the final green light, but we anticipate that this year. So we're on the cusp of starting the deployment. Some of the initial deployments have started with discretionary grants, and there are significant discretionary grant emphasis by the US DOT. In fact, they just awarded CV2X accelerated grants, essentially to Texas, to Utah, and the adjoining states, Wyoming. Arizona has also, with Maricopa County. So we are at the, basically, if you allow me to make that analogy, we're at the ground floor. But ready to rise very quickly to using this technology as a component of the overall approach that we are taking as a community to address safety.
Great, thank you. It is so important that everything's a component of this larger system, and I think it's
the safe system approach is something that resonates with all of us, I believe.
Something we all need to be doing and attacking this from every angle possible. So I have a question. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. I had a question in the chat box about what has the public reaction in Washington been to speed cameras? How did the state government overcome the perception issues? Shelly, I know you've addressed this somewhat in the chat box, but for Rick as well, there's traffic safety speed cameras in Washington, D.C. as well. What has for both of you that public reaction been, and how do you overcome those obstacles?
Well, I would say in many cities in Washington, they do have big Vision Zero plans. The plans are well supported, and in those towns, we find the most use of traffic safety cameras to help increase state safety on the roadways. We asked questions about enforcement of speeding on our statewide survey and found that there's a large majority of people who really approve of enforcement for speeding. We didn't separate it out for cameras. But the best thing we know about cameras is that once they've been up for a little bit, 90% of people who get a ticket never get a second one. They do exactly what they're supposed to be doing by lowering speeds and having the impact that we want them to have. So when we can see that success, it's pretty easy to keep the sale of, keep the public aware of why it's a good thing.
Yeah, and I'll echo what Shelly shared from this Washington, in that in our cases, we have less than 1% of people who receive a second ticket at the same location. When we look at telematics data and other indicators of speed, there truly is a change in behavior, and enforcement is a key part of that. And when we asked residents about their support of the program, 86% of DC residents supported the program and saw the success of the program. And so that's led to almost 90% of the cameras being placed at locations where residents have requested a camera. We've combined that with the data that we've seen from where along our high entry network that I discussed. And so it truly has become a community supported and dare I say community demanded program, because people are seeing safer streets right outside their front doors.
Great, thank you, Rick. Elizabeth, a question came in that I think you could field, and I touched on this during my presentation, but hoping you could sort of briefly elaborate on some of the differences between GHSA's state-reported data and what is in the NHTSA's FARS database.
Absolutely. So yeah, the report, we try to be as kind of comprehensive as possible. And so that's always, kind of balancing timeliness and detail. So what we can get from the states in a very timely way is counts, counts of pedestrian fatalities in the state. We get that for, so in this report, we have the 2023 counts from the states. But of course, people have questions about, what are the characteristics of these incidents, of these crashes? For that, we have to go to the FARS data. The FARS data is from 2022. But it has much more detail and it takes much longer to come out precisely because of all this detail. It takes a while to kind of track down all the factors, make sure all it's accurate. All this checking takes a long time. Some other differences in the way, there's a little table on it in the report that goes into way more detail than I will right now because I don't want to take up everyone's time. Another thing about FARS is FARS only counts fatalities that occur within 30 days of the crash. States may have different rules about how they count and classify fatalities. They may have different rules about how they classify pedestrians, how our e-scooter users classified, the type of roadways, things like that. So there's all sorts of sort of differences around the edges. The overall counts end up being the same, but for purposes of this report, really, we have the state data for 2023 for the timeliness, the most recent data. We go back a year for the FARS data to get that extra detail about the crash characteristics.
Thank you. We also had a question in the chat of noting about the large portion of the increase in pedestrian fatalities coming at night. Do we know what is causing that? I suggested the need to invest in artificial lighting and make sure it's high quality and maintained. But what else might be at play there? That's a very large difference. So for anyone here, what's any thoughts on what might be driving this rise in nighttime pedestrian fatalities?
I can share from Washington, D.C.'s perspective. We saw that nearly 12% of our pedestrian fatalities were tied to the unhoused community. And so one of the challenges that we heard in engaging this community through public participation and engagement was that nighttime was the time when it was best for them to move around. It's one of the more dangerous times for the unhoused population. And so it was a time that they were more active in moving throughout the city. And so tragically, we think that's led to part of our challenge. We're also looking at our infrastructure and how the infrastructure can better lend itself to making our pedestrians more visible and separating our traveling public. We've got a historic investment under Mayor Bowser to invest in more bike lanes, because unfortunately many of our fatalities were also bicycle related, were happening in the evening hours too, in unprotected bike lane areas. So those are a few of the things that we've observed and are trying to remedy here in the district.
I don't have a cause, but in terms of what is causing that, I think that Rick did a good job with describing the situation with the unhoused community. But I hearken back to my little talk about the luminaire and how you can use technology to flash an LED or solid state luminaire if you have a pedestrian detection. And technology is not a panacea, but technology is a component of the total approach. So there are ways to address the nighttime pedestrian fatality problem from a technical point of view. In addition to on-vehicle AED, pedestrian AED systems, but the whole combination of policy, of technology, of engineering, and education is what we need.
Great, thank you, Jim. Getting a lot of great questions and our time is running out. Thank you to everyone who's answering, dropping questions in the Q&A box. We will be able to capture everything here and we'll try to follow up with those that we cannot get back to today. But thank you again for asking some great questions and offering some comments. Shelly, and the question for you. I was so intrigued by the addition of land use to the Washington Safe System graphic. I think that presents a lot of interesting opportunities and potentially some challenges. Sort of curious how that has played out in terms of planning for pedestrian safety and giving you new chances to address that in a new way.
Yeah, so this is new for us too. This is a new addition and it is being included in our state strategic highway safety plan. So by including it there, it gives us a chance to address it, to work with planners, to make sure that we're, you know, the more I get into the safe system approach, the more I know that we can't just do a thing, right? We have to do it in concert. And so as we find those locations where we want to be working in together, it gives us another entity to bring to the table to talk about how we can improve safety along those areas where we know it's a problem, especially for pedestrians.
Great. Thank you. I see one more question in the chat box asking, are there more pedestrians out on the roads than 4 years ago? We do not have a great in-depth sort of pedestrian miles traveled data like we do vehicle miles traveled to know how far vehicles are, how often and far people are driving vehicles. There is some analysis out there indicating that over the past 4 years, there were fewer pedestrians actually, which really points to some of the troubling nature of some of these increases the past few years when both the numbers of deaths were going up, but also, as some early data indicates, there were fewer people out on the road. So that's troubling if indeed exposure is down while fatalities are still on the rise. Question very briefly as we're approaching our end here for Rick and Shelly. There's a lot of changes in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the big infrastructure bill a few years ago, new funding for programs, new requirements for public outreach, lot of different changes there. What sort of big opportunity has that presented for how SHSOs work on pedestrian safety? I'll start with you, Rick, and then Shelly.
Oh, I was hoping Shelly would go first. No, I'm kidding. I think there are a couple of things. One, really appreciative of GHSA and our partners working to provide more flexibility in how 405 funds are spent. And so I think that's going to provide dividends in giving HSOs more tools in the toolbox. I also think things like the National Roadway Safety Strategy that Secretary Buttigieg has issued really does call for an all hands on approach. And I think as Shelly said, it's so tempting for us to work in silos, but we can't just do a thing. We have to really look at the system and the complex inputs that lead to crashes, fatalities, and injuries in its totality. And I think we're finally starting to think about roadway safety as a public health crisis. And I think the more that we can pivot to a public health model, engage the public health experts, and really leverage some of the same thinking that we've used in that area, I think we'll see hopefully some great dividends in reducing, especially amongst our most vulnerable roadway users.
Thank you. Shelly?
Yeah, in Washington, we've had with the Bill Act, we are looking at expanding community outreach, which is a great thing to be doing. We learn so much more. That has opened up some opportunities for us. We've been doing lots of listening sessions. Our tribal listening session comes to mind really quickly as they talk about the state of the roads on a reservation compared to the state of the roads when you cross that reservation line. We looked at case file fatalities and found no shoulders, no white stripe, no way for pedestrians to walk safely, especially in the dark. And yet the Yakima tribe has used what they call must cameras to track pedestrian traffic. And there's a ton of pedestrian traffic on these roads that have no facilities or granting any space for pedestrians to walk. So that's been a really great positive aspect of really leaning into the community outreach piece. The other thing that we have in Washington that I'm so proud of is we have a Washington Active Transportation Safety Advisory Council, and that is really bringing everybody to the table to talk about how we can improve traffic safety for pedestrians. They make recommendations to the legislature every year. In fact, when we see the expansion of traffic safety cameras, that was one of their recommendations to continue to expand those. So they're a pretty powerful group in line with, really reaching out to the people who are impacted by traffic crashes.
Great, thank you. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today's webinar. I see a number of questions we were not able to get to. Thank you to everyone for asking questions. As I said, we will capture these and respond to as many as possible. Thank you to all of our panelists, Rick Birt, Shelly Baldwin, Jim Misener, and Elizabeth Petraglia. Appreciate your attention on pedestrian safety, your dedication to keeping people outside the vehicle safe. I would like to note too, Qualcomm, who sponsored today's webinar, is also a supporter of the GHSA annual meeting, which is a great chance to learn more about pedestrian safety. You can join us in Indianapolis this September. General sessions, workshops, number of different parts of the meeting will be focused on pedestrian safety, the safe system approach, and a number of the issues we spoke about today. You can visit ghsameeting.org to learn more. And early bird reduced registration rates expire July 26th, so heads up on that. Stay tuned tomorrow for a follow-up email that has a link to the recording of today's webinar, the Washington camera guide, and any other resources that were mentioned. And I sincerely thank again all of our panelists, Qualcomm for sponsoring the webinar, and thank you for your passion for joining us and for your passion for pedestrian safety. Hope everyone has a safe and pleasant rest of the day.